Yeah, good to be here.
No, beautiful. And it's a pleasure to have you here, mate, with such big event coming up for you guys, like kind of like momental, when you have those kind of timestamps in history throughout your life. And as a band, this is going to stand out as one. Like, what was the idea behind putting together a show playing these two albums in full?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing that made us reflect back on Citadel was when we realized it was approaching the 10-year anniversary of that record
Hmm.
in 2024. And the initial idea was that we wanted to remaster that record and make a few just little changes that with things that we'd learnt over the years from the other albums, from Earn and Exul, and little ways we thought we could improve the way it sounded. Not that we weren't happy with the original, but you learn more lessons and you're like, oh, maybe if we did this, which we did on Exul, we did that, it'd probably sound a little bit, better, a little bit more open, a little bit heavier, whatever. So it was kind of in that process of kind of remastering that record and revisiting it that we thought, oh man, some of these songs we haven't played in quite a while.
Yeah.
Citadel starts off with Painters of the Tempest, which is a three-part, 23-minute song, and we played part two sometimes, but the full three parts, playing it in full, we hadn't done in many years,
Mm.
and revisiting it kind of reminded me of how much I loved those songs. And so I kind of pitched it to the guys of like, hey, what if we did a tour where we played this album in full? And of course that's only 45 minutes, and for us often our headline shows are hour and a half plus. And
Yeah.
I thought, well, what if we did the whole new album as well, because then we're doing a really kind of much loved album in Citadel celebrating its 10th anniversary, kind of revisiting these great tracks. And at the same time, our latest album, Exul, has been our most successful album to date, and been received really, really well. And we thought, well, if we do both of those, maybe we can squeeze it in, and it becomes almost a 2 hour show, which is pretty big. But it's something we had the idea, and we decided to do it first in Europe last
Yeah.
October. And then it was because that tour went so well, and in the comments we were always getting people saying, "Oh, bring this tour to Australia." So we are.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing. I was going to ask you too, when you first stepped out on stage playing these, or even getting in the rehearsal room, were you like, "Oh, this is going to be a big night," and you're doing these nights back to back as well. Was it exhausting, kind of getting out there and doing it when you first started?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you're playing a show that's longer than what you've done before, it takes a little bit of getting used to.
Mm.
I think the interesting thing with this show is that there's a few shorter, like acoustic items, or I guess what you would more call like, intro and outro type of interlude, more tracks that we don't normally play live very much or at
Mm.
all, and we wouldn't normally play this many of them in a show. So it means there's a bit more of this ebb and flow of like there's this 20 minutes of hectic progressive metal, and then there's a 3 minute outro to that track which we play,
Yeah.
and there's this more of these ebbs and flows with these moments of 3 minutes here, 4 minutes there, of these kind of real changes of pace in the show. And often those changes of the pace are just myself on stage, playing violin or singing by myself, and the other guys go off stage for 3 or 4 minutes. They have a little break and they come back on. And it's just a little bit of a different vibe as opposed to just having, maybe seven songs across an hour and a half, which is maybe a normal show for us.
Yeah.
But them all back to back, and maybe one of them's acoustic in the middle, but the rest is, a bit more what you'd think of as a typical Ne Obliviscaris song. So, yeah, I mean, but after a few shows, you get used to it, and I think there's enough ups and downs in the vibe, and also, like I said, those opportunities for some of the members to just get these little mini breaks here and
Mm.
there to make that once we got used to it, it actually was fine.
Yeah. And do you feel playing these little tracks in between as well really lets the room breathe because it's a bit of a break for the crowd as well? It's not like, jumping around and intense all the time. I'm not saying that you don't have breathing room in your songs,
Mm.
but do you feel that it's helped with the crowd's energy the whole way through? Because it's instead of, guess, putting the show together like this is less of a show, I guess. It's almost like a piece at the end of the day.
Yes. Yeah, I think that basically there's always a fine line between
Mm.
giving the audience time to breathe, versus letting them cool down too much and then you can't warm them up again.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're going, you know, like if you're playing, brutal technical death metal that's just non-stop heavy all the time, I've never seen a band of that genre play a 2 hour show because you'd be kind of smashing the audience over the head
Yeah.
musically in a way that maybe is not sustainable, So some of those bands will be doing, they might be doing 75, 80 minutes and it's like super intense the whole way through. Whereas I think that because we have those ebbs and flows, I think it makes a longer show like this work a bit better.
Mm.
If it's just metal all the time for 2 hours, some bands could pull it off, but I think for what we do, having those ebbs and flows, yeah, creates a bit of dynamics in
Mm.
the evening, which for people that are fans of our music, I think it can work really well.
Yeah, no, and like I listening to the albums before. Now, are you playing them? I haven't actually checked the set list. Are you doing the albums completely in order, going from Citadel and then flowing right into the next, or are you mixing it up a little bit?
We're playing Citadel in full
Yep.
and followed by Exul in full, and we really wanted to do it that way in part because when I was coming up with the track listing for both albums and when we were writing them, it was very much working out, these jigsaw pieces to put together in a way that fit and flowed. Like on Citadel, there's only one moment of silence on the whole of Citadel, and it's in between the end of Painters of the Tempest and the start of Pyrrhic.
Mm.
Aside from that, there isn't a moment of silence on the whole record. Everything just keeps flowing to the next track. So that album really is these two halves
Yeah.
that that flow endlessly for 20 plus minutes. And so the idea of giving the audience that version, which is then the same as what they listen to when they listen to the record in full at home, but the live energy, live experience mixed in.
And playing these albums in full as well, does it hit you a little bit harder than, say, when you're in the studio recording these for the first time? Actually getting out there, the vision's there, you're playing it start to finish. Do you get a bit emotional with it at all? Is it something, especially that first show doing it all, was it something that kind of took you back a little bit too?
Yeah, I think that I think that one of the things when you're playing stuff live is when you're doing something maybe for the first time or the first few times, often you're a little bit more in your head. You're thinking
Mm,
about what to do. You're thinking about what to perform. You're making sure this song that you maybe haven't played before or very much or whatever, that you don't stuff it up because you want the audience to have a good time. So it's probably more once you get a few shows into the tour, and you've done that set a few times, and then you feel really comfortable, like, yep, I didn't stuff it up last night. I can just go and have fun with this.
yeah, yeah.
And then as the tour goes on, it just becomes more and more where, I'm not having to think to remember the parts. I just know them. And then I can just really enjoy it. And then I can connect a bit more emotionally. So I'm always emotionally connected, but you're able to do that a little bit deeper when you can switch off your brain, when you're not having to remember, oh, I got to remember to count this bit or come in here. And so that was, I think, the really fun experience with that tour because, the cool thing for the Australian audiences is that we've already done this show, you know, 27 times in Europe, and we're doing it actually twice in Mexico just a couple weeks before
Oh,
Australia.
wow.
And so we'll get the chance to, make sure that we've got it very well honed.
Yep.
And yeah, and then we come to Australia, just having done a big tour, hopefully in prime form and with everything, ready and firing.
No, and that's great too. And speaking of, playing these shows in Australia, this will be the kind of like the Aussies' first reaction to seeing James in the band as well. How's he feeling? Is he excited to come out and do these shows and perform in front of the masses? Because you're playing quite big shows. I noticed the Sydney show. I'm so used to seeing you at the Manning Bar, and now it's kind of stepping up to the Metro Theatre as well. I'm like, yeah, mad, big jump, awesome venue, perfect for it, perfect for it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to play in the Metro Theatre. The Manning Bar, we sold that out quite quickly last time, which was fantastic.
Mm.
The Metro Theatre, I spent my high school years in Sydney, and the very first metal show I ever went to was, maybe about 1998 or something. I went and saw Fear Factory on their Obsolete tour with Segression supporting, or, very cool Australian metal band.
Yeah.
And that was my very first metal show that I went to at the Metro Theatre. But we've never actually played there, so that'll be really fun. And yes, James is really excited. It's one of those funny things where we've actually been touring with James now for almost 2 years,
Yeah.
and he's done multiple European tours. He's been to the US, been to South America. The only place he hasn't been is Australia, basically, which was the only tour that Zen has done with us in the last couple of years. So,
Mm.
that's really exciting. Like he's an incredible vocalist, incredible performer. He doesn't try to copy what Zen did. He just does things in his own way, but in a really brilliant way. Like obviously, the reason why we asked him to fill in initially and then eventually to join when Zen had decided that he wanted to step down
Yeah.
was just because for me he's one of my favorite vocalists, and it's pretty exciting to have someone like that in your band. And him and I have a lot of fun on stage. I think we have a really cool chemistry together. We just have a lot of fun performing, and it's just been really cool. And it's been nice because of course in a band you know, you do have a bit of a family
Mm.
atmosphere, and when that changes, you always hope that the person coming in is going to be able to fit in really well. And it's kind of rare that you get almost a 2 year like test trial of what it would be like to have someone in the band. But the really cool thing was with James, like when Zen made the decision that he was going to step down, I actually messaged a guy saying like, "Oh, do we need to have a chat like about the new vocalist? Like, we're just getting James, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." So we had like a quick chat to,
Yeah.
just double check that no one has any ideas. No, no, no. Like, yeah, James is a guy. We love him, and it'll be great to introduce him to Australian audiences for sure.
It's interesting. I almost feel like, and you mentioned family, it's that type of dynamic. It's like pretend you're dating, you've been dating for 2 years, but you've avoided meeting the parents. And now finally the Australian tour, you meet the parents. So it's like, oh, here's James. Sorry, it's taken 2 years.
Yeah, you know what? It is a little bit like that because I think that um, after the European tour in 2023,
Mm,
where we had James fill in quite short notice, like on 10 days notice. And we were a bit nervous because it was such late notice and people had bought tickets expecting Zen to be on vocals.
mm.
But then the response was so fantastic that then when we went to the USA a few months later, we were like, no, we're really confident. We know that the show is great. The response from the fans in Europe was great, and so it'll be fine. And so we kind of lost that nervousness of like, will fans respond to it?
Yeah.
But if I'm being honest, coming back to Australia, there was that little twinge of like, oh man, we've been playing here in Australia for so long. Like, of course, the history with the band goes back so many more years. And so it feels like a bit more of a big deal than in everywhere else in the world. But it is one of those things where, like you said, if you got the right girl, introducing to the parents is a wonderful thing because you're really proud to
Yeah.
say like, here they are, aren't they wonderful? And so I think that's very much a great analogy for us bringing him to Australia for sure.
No, it definitely is, and definitely, and you're not just coming alone. And James is not the only one. You got Psychroptic opening for you guys. This is kind of like a match made in heaven. It's been a while too since you guys have shared the stage in Australia. How'd that all come together? Just kind of feels fitting at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the last few tours, we've mostly had international
Mm,
bands opening up for us. And as wonderful as that is, I mean, I've always been a really big part of the Australian metal scene. I used to work extensively as like a booking agent, manager, tour promoter, working with local bands here in Australia. We have such a great scene here in Australia. And it kind of had in the back of my head of like, we should maybe get some more Australian bands touring with us to showcase them. And so Croptic is just a band we've personally been huge fans of
okay.
for a long time. So how it came about was we really thought, oh, do you think they'd want to? Do you think they'd be interested? Let's ask them, because we love them. So, we obviously know the guys from going way back. We opened up for them way back. I think it was 2008 or
Yeah,
something,
wow.
a very long time ago, just on a couple shows in I think it was Melbourne and Canberra or Melbourne and Sydney, something like that. So, going back a long time. And yeah, I mean, I think still, they've been one of the most consistently great bands in the Australian metal scene for 20 years. And
Mm.
so we just feel honored to have them part of the tour. They're incredibly tight live, and incredibly consistent. I remember like 15, plus years ago, just being right there at the front row watching Dave Haley drum
Yeah.
and just being in awe, and I know that, he was an inspiration for, our drummer Dan Presland, who, really just, looked at Dave as one of the best metal drummers going around. And we just love the ability to tour with bands that we really like. And so,
Mm.
I think that's the cool thing with this sort of combination. Just get two Australian metal bands that, a little bit different, but both awesome in their own way.
Yeah. No, and it's and you mentioned watching them back then in 2008. That feels like a lifetime ago now. I was trying to say, oh, yeah, that was about 10, 12 years ago. No, that's getting closer to 20 years ago than I'd like to admit,
Yes.
my friend. And speaking of that, too, because you guys have been around for 20 odd years now, like, what's changed? What have you learned over all these years of doing music, all these years of touring, all the long flights, everything you do? What's one thing if you could write a letter to your past self right now, what advice would you give or tell, young Tim to look out for?
Ah, I think one of the challenging things is that in some ways, I'd probably say I shouldn't tell the younger version anything, because if I
Mm.
realized how hard it is to try to make a living out of playing in a metal band, maybe I might have quit, but I'm really thankful I didn't. I guess the big thing is just to keep at it and keep learning and growing in every area of the band.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, keep learning and growing in how you are at your instrument, how you are at playing as a group, how
Mm.
you approach the way you handle your live show with your stage performance and your energy in that sort of way. How you improve the way that you're working with crew to get the best possible show with sound, with lights, with things like that. The different elements of how to make sure that when you're mixing an album, that you get it to sound the way that you want it to sound in your head. Things
Mm.
like that. Where every album we keep learning things that to go along the way. I mean, the ability to learn, how to tour and not run yourself into the ground.
Mm.
And I guess, if I was gonna say anything to my young self, it would probably be on that basis of, um, to make sure you look after yourself a bit better. Because, I got to 2019 and I was completely burnt out and I was really struggling. We had been on the road for 5 years, just nonstop, like 3 to 6 months of every year, which, which is a lot because you come home from a tour for 6 weeks, you come home, you finish the 6 week tour, you come home for 4 weeks, you go away for
Yeah.
7 weeks, you come back for 5 weeks, you go away for three, you come back for four. Like that was kind of what it was. And there's no rhythm at home. And if you don't look after yourself really well, it can really grind you down. And so that really impacted my personal life. Um, is a big part of, why I end up, getting divorced about 5 years ago and things like that. Because if you don't look after yourself, you're just not as fun a person to be around, to say the
Yeah.
least. And so, whereas these days, I'm a pretty boring person on tour a lot of the time, and I say that quite proudly. I don't really drink on the road at all. I do a lot of meditation when I'm home. I try to do some on the road as much as I can.
Yeah.
I walk around a lot on the road with headphones, so I get a lot of vocal rest, so I can make sure I sing and perform as best as I can for the audience. And just that seriousness of how to be a live touring artist and how to look after yourself and still be a happy human. I think here in 2025, I don't have it all worked out, but I'm way better than I used to be. And that makes the band a lot more fun because it's not a trade of running myself into the ground to do something special. I
Mm.
can go do something special. I can do these tours, and I can come home and I can hang out with my daughter and see my family and friends and still be a happy person amongst it all. And that's probably the thing that's taken the longest, but it's probably the biggest lessons.
And I think that's important too, because I've talked to people in the past and they've gone, oh, they're in a successful band, like, something that's blown up and then a member quits. And they're like, why would that happen? You finally kind of made them. Like, I don't think you realize how hard travel is and being away all the time. And
Yeah.
not everyone can just do that. It is extremely difficult. I'm like, you've got to fly over to Europe all the time to do these tours. I flew over once in 2023 and I'm still whinging about it to this day. So I know the feeling, and it is
Yeah.
important to kind of keep yourself in tune like that. So it was lovely to hear you describe it like that too, because I've always thought that was the kind of way, and that's the way you've got to keep going, because you can't do this for 20 years unless you listen to your body really and your mind.
Absolutely. And that's exactly right of, it's not for everyone. And some
Mhm.
people love the idea of playing in a band, but then maybe their body or their mind doesn't love it so much.
Yeah,
Or maybe their friends or their family or their partner or their kids, or maybe they don't love it. And then they have to choose, about what to prioritize. And sometimes you can't prioritize two things as equal first.
yeah,
You know, sometimes you have to put something first if you're going to do it properly. And then there's consequences that come along with that. You have to make sacrifices to be in a touring band, and you have to be okay with that. And some people are okay with that for a while. And then eventually they're like, you know what? You know, I don't want to make that sacrifice anymore. I want to be home. I want to focus on these other things, whether it's for a family, whether it's for their own well-being, whether they just want to have a different lifestyle. And so, yeah, that is exactly why a, the prime time for people to leave a lot of bands is, I would say 2 to 5 years after they start touring heavily.
yeah.
When you start, people tour around the world once or twice, and then the novelty wears off, and for some people, then they give it in, give it in from there. But for me, my favorite part of the band is performing live, and so that's why I've been so hell bent on learning how to do it in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Because in Australia, we can only really tour about once a year, at most.
Mm.
And so the rest of the year, 11 and a half months of the year, I want to play shows. So try to go everywhere we can in the world to do that.
Exactly, exactly. Well, let's switch it up a bit before we end today. Something a bit fun, because I'm curious as well. Besides, you're the second vocalist who plays violin at the same time. I've had the chance to interview. I've also talked to Eddie from Imminence, a bit newer of a band, a bit more of a most progressive, more of the core. But I find it fascinating. I find it fascinating that you kind of that was the instrument you picked to go along with the style of music you've done. Was it that was just the instrument you learned as a child and you grew from there? What inspired you to pick up the violin and put it into metal? And what were the bands that kind of inspired you to get into a band in the first place?
Yeah, so just quickly, Eddie from Imminence is a friend. I just met him a few months ago in December, and we just released a new song last month, like a new version of their song "Come What May" with me
Yes.
on violin and vocals, which was so fun to do. And it's been fun to connect with him because when we met, it was like,
So
it's
like
a
a
little bit.
Spider-Man meme where you're pointing at
That's
each other.
exactly what I was going to say. Exactly what I was going to say. Because in the whole world of metal, he's the only other guy that I know that is like a lead singer slash violinist.
Mm,
There's a few other violinists around, but there's not, there's not many singers slash violinists around that are prominent members of the band and help
yeah.
write the music. And so we were like definitely sharing a lot of notes on where we came from with our backgrounds and stuff like that. So for me personally, I started learning violin about the age of 6. My mom
Yeah.
just said, "Hey, do you want to learn something?" And she played the piano, um and she just said that she wasn't even sure why I chose the violin. She was like, "You must have heard it somewhere," because that's just what I happened to choose when I was 6.
Yeah.
And basically, when I got into high school, I started getting into punk, I got into hardcore, I started getting into metal, maybe about 15, 16. And so I just started getting into all these alternative types of music. When I was about 17, 18, I really wanted to join a band. I started to teach myself guitar because I thought, well, no one plays violin in a band,
Yeah.
right? And so I thought, well, maybe I can sing, maybe I can play guitar. So I thought, I better learn something like guitar so I can do it. I never really got very good at guitar. I never took lessons. I just did a bit on the side, but I did love playing the violin. And at the same time, I was pursuing being a violinist as a profession. About 17, I was thinking, maybe I'll join an orchestra or be a soloist. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to be like a world famous classical violinist. That's with my 17-year-old, bravado. That's what I
Yeah.
thought I would aim for. And I put the work in. I did from when I was about 17, 18, I did like 3, 4 hours violin practice a day for years, when I was studying at university. And I always had this mentality um, that if I did the work,
Mm.
why not me?
Okay.
Why not me? Like, yeah, other people are talented. I think I'm pretty talented, but if I do the work, well, why not me? And so it was really just the combination of those two worlds of like becoming a metalhead more and more as I got older, but pursuing this life as a classical violinist. And there were just little things here and there. I remember just even little things like hearing Metallica's S&M
Mm.
record, with a full symphony orchestra and being inspired by hearing that mixture of rock and metal with a symphony orchestra. I discovered Apocalyptica, when I was about 18, and just hearing distortion on a cello was really inspiring. And I thought, oh, I wonder how that would sound on a violin. I'd never heard of that before. There was this really cool kind of metal band from the Bay Area in California, very unknown, called Judgment Day, and it was a violinist, cellist, and a drummer.
Oh,
And they were like just this tiny underground band I happened to discover on MySpace or something like a million years ago. And it blew my mind because it was like distorted violin and playing in this more metal style, but just in this little trio of violin, cello, and drums. And it was really, really cool. And it was about this time I met Zen, and he was starting a band, and I was thinking that it could be kind of cool to play violin in a band, but I was also trying to write songs on guitar because I didn't know if the violin thing would happen. And it was just kind of, cool to meet someone who was open-minded like Zen, and he loved the idea of having something different in the band like that.
yeah.
And it just then became this big experiment to kind of learn how to do it because there wasn't really anyone to copy. A lot of the violinists that I'd heard playing in metal, there's little bits in a band like My Dying Bride, or there'd be a violin solo in a song by Nightwish or
Mm.
Tristania, bands like that. But it was mostly in a folk metal style,
Yeah.
and there was very little playing in a metal style. But I wanted to play like Jeff Loomis from Nevermore. I wanted
Yeah.
to play like John Petrucci from Dream Theater, but on the violin, you know. And so that's the interesting thing with my influences, and I also wanted to play like John Coltrane,
Mm.
who's a unbelievable, one of the greatest jazz musicians of all
Yeah.
time. And so, I love playing jazz violin, and I experimented, and so it was really this melting pot. And that's why when I play the violin, I do think that no one really plays the violin in metal like I do.
Mm.
I don't say it's better or worse. It's just different, and I
Yeah.
sound like myself. And I think that's the kind of weird melting pot of, stuff that I've brought on, from my musical heritage, I guess.
And that's the magic of it all over the years. And that was a great answer too, because Eddie's answer was, yeah, we did a couple of acoustic stuff of our old things. I did the violin on video, and the fans went, oi, I want you to do more of that. And he's like, better learn how to do it live. So no, I love that. Well, Tim, that was great. I loved hearing all of that. That was fantastic. And thank you so much for joining us here today. I can't wait for the shows in June. I can't believe that's creeping up on us. We're nearly halfway
Mm.
through 2025. It's getting scary. But is there anything final you want to say to the fans that are getting pumped up for these shows before I let you go?
Oh, just thank you so much for everyone that supported us over the years, whether you just discovered us a few weeks ago or have been following us for, almost 20 years now. It is always a really special thing to get to play in Australia. The crowds
Mm.
are incredible. It is where we learned how to be a band and where we kind of honed our skills, and it always feels like this really special homecoming wherever we are across Australia. And so just can't wait to get there for what's going to be definitely, a very special series of shows.
Beautiful, mate. Well, I cannot wait. And people watching this, if you're curious, the ticket links will be down in the comments below. But Tim, thank you very much. We'll see you in June.
Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers, mate. Bye.